When I was a beginner knitter, I legitimately thought that this 2 balls of DK weight yarn was enough to knit an entire sweater, colourwork sweater, for my 6'4" tall husband. Today I thought it'd be really funny to talk about some other beginner mistakes you might make, or you might have made, and some beginner tips that I think you can completely ignore and you don't need to worry about. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Emily Knits channel. My name is Emily. I am a knitter and crocheter in my mid-30s, based in the north of Nottinghamshire in the UK, where I live with my husband and our 2 dogs close to Sherwood Forest. Today, as you may have guessed from the initial intro bit, I have a bit of a different video for you today. We're going to talk about beginner knitting pitfalls, I guess, or mistakes, and then some other beginner knitting tips that you see quite regularly on the internet that I think you can absolutely completely disregard. Let's get into it without too much waffle. I'm not going to talk about what I'm wearing because this is going to come up later in the episode, so let's dive straight into it. I'm going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. It's not a disclaimer. I'm just going to preface this by saying I am not by any means an expert. If you want to do all of the tips that I'm saying, I think you can ignore. That's absolutely fine. And if you want to ignore the tips that I suggest, then that's also absolutely fine. This also isn't meant to poke fun at anybody other than me. I'm going to poke fun at my own beginner mistakes because we all make them, and I think we learn a lot from them. So yeah, let's get into it. Also, what I want to know at the end of it is, what was your not silliest, because I don't like that, your funniest beginner knitting mistake or misconception, like thinking that for a full-grown adult human who is quite tall, that you could make a full sweater out of 2 balls of DK weight yarn. What was your biggest knitting mishap? I want to know in the comments. Let's have a good chat about it, because there's going to be quite a few here from me and I want to feel a bit better about them. Yeah, let's get into it. Before I forget, you can find me everywhere you can find me, including affiliate links and stuff like that, is down below in the description box. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free to on any of those ways. And yeah, let's crack on. So the other thing I was going to say before I get properly into it is just to give you a bit of context on my knitting background. I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail because I could waffle about that for ages. If you've been here before, you know I waffle. So we'll keep it succinct. I have been knitting properly for probably about 5 years. 2020, I really picked it back up again, like a lot of us did during COVID, during the pandemic. Probably late 2020, I think. It's probably about 5 years roundabout now in September when I'm filming this. When I started, it was probably about September time. I had learnt to knit a little bit when I was young, but we're talking like I learned how to do the knit stitch and I wasn't very good at it, and that was it. So, I wasn't a knitter. I hadn't made anything really, except I think some basically face cloths, some squares of garter stitch that were extremely uneven. So I don't consider myself an expert knitter. I consider myself an experienced knitter. And one thing that I've always been is quite a, I guess, confident or adventurous knitter. And we're going to come on to that. I think that, there's a lot to be said for just trying something and seeing how it works. And you learn through trial and error, certainly in this hobby. So none of this, like I say, none of this that I'm going to say is gospel. I don't think that I am the authority on this in any way, shape or form. And I would be really interested to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below as well, because I think that could be really interesting. But yeah, I thought it would just be really fun to look at some of the silly things that we do as beginners, or some of the maybe misguided things we do as beginners, and some of the things that we do that are like that work out really, really well. So what can we maybe learn from our beginner selves to move forward? So yeah, the first thing I think that is a definite tip for beginners is just making sure you've got enough yarn for your project. And actually, I think this is something that comes with experience, because this literally came from, we went into Boys in, I can't remember where it was, but it was somewhere other than our normal one, and it had a really big yarn selection. Boys is a northern UK, I'm pretty certain, almost like miscellaneous shop. They sell all sorts of homewares and things like that. They sell fishing tackle, they sell medicines, they sell perfume, they sell sweets. They sell paint and household DIY things, but they also generally have like a craft and haberdashery section. It's usually fairly budget friendly yarns. But I literally went in and decided that my husband would like this colour a lot. And I thought I'd get another colour to go with it. And this and another ball would be enough to go to make him an entire sweater. So yeah, understanding weights of yarn, understanding amounts of yarn, and understanding, I think, either how to read a pattern or maybe just understanding what you want to make and how much yarn you might need to do that, which is easier said than done as a beginner, isn't it? And I think into that links gauge, and I've got another project here that I'm going to show you. I have to be careful with this one because it is now a dog project and it's covered in hair. If you've been here before, you've seen my dogs. They're incredibly hairy. They shed a lot. So it's covered in hair and I don't want to cover myself in it. So this is actually not my very first knitted project. I don't have my very first knitted project. That was a garter stitch scarf, like most people do, and that went in the bin a long time ago because I just didn't use it. It wasn't even really colours that I liked. But this monstrosity was what I did after that, which is this huge patchwork blanket. I don't want to unroll it because, like I say, oh my god, I'm covered in dog hair. Essentially, I started off with, let's see if I can find them. This colour, and this. It's yellow here, but there was other bits. Where's the rest of it? So that was the same yarn, pinky colour. They were all from Aldi. They were really budget-friendly acrylic, and they were what I started off with. I got loads of them. I didn't know what to do with them, and in the end, I just turned them into basically squares that I then turned into a blanket, and I then added into them lots of things from. I got like a bulk lot of random yarn off eBay for a tenner. It was mostly acrylic, which is fine. And I made loads of different squares. So I've got this one that's like a basket weave square. These weren't actually, these fluffy ones, these are really interesting. These weren't from that. I had some yarn that my mum gifted me that my nana had, so it had been passed down to her. There's a couple of squares of that. They're like eyelash yarn. You may have just seen one of the problems with this there. There's another one of those there. There was this sort of faded one. A greeny bluey one, which was actually really nice. I really like that colour. This is one of the few that I actually bought, this sort of autumnal colour for it. That I bought a specific ball of for. There's some autumnal, like fiery colours in there. And there is a few issues with this. I did not understand gauge or yarn weight or anything like that. So some squares, there is one somewhere that is very noticeably incredibly small compared to the rest of them. Let's see if I can find it. I'm covering myself in dog hair. Okay, so it's this one, and the irony is that I think over the years, because this is now 5 years old, it's actually stretched out and it's the same size. But I remember when I was stitching them together, this was not the same size at all, and I had to really stretch it. That was definitely one of the pitfalls that I made. I did not understand. I did get a bit of an understanding at some point because I just found there was a square there. Where is it? This one, which is actually two yarns held together. So I did eventually get a bit of an understanding of that. So gauge is really, really key, and that is something that I would say as a beginner to go and find out, go and get some understanding of. I'm not going to try and explain it because I'm not good at explaining stuff like that, and I'm not an expert. But another silly mistake I made at some point, and actually I made this three times. I didn't learn the first time I made this mistake. Was to, especially for garments, so gauge doesn't matter so much for something like this. It's a blanket, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter for shawls and things like that, but especially for garments, gauge is really, really important. And I didn't learn the first time I made this mistake, so I had at least two that I can think of off the top of my head, and I think probably actually 3 times. So the first one was the Aosta cardigan by the Knit Pearl Girl. I don't think I even understood yarn weights at the time. I don't have any pictures of it, unfortunately, because we are talking 4.5 years ago now. I just picked a yarn, didn't check the weight, didn't check. I think I even held it with a standard brushed alpaca. It was Drops Alaska held with Drops brushed alpaca silk. So an Aran weight, 100% wool held with Drops brushed alpaca silk. Which actually should have been somewhere around the right kind of gauge, but I also didn't swatch. I just picked the needle size that it said in the pattern and I cast on, and then I got to the bottom of my raglan and I couldn't understand why it was absolutely huge on me. I also didn't measure myself. So checking gauge, and also measuring yourself. I fell foul of this again. I've mentioned this before on the channel because probably about 3 or 4 months after that, I tried to knit a sweater for my husband. This was, at least this time I had enough yarn for it. I had bought enough yarn for it. But it was, I bought a yarn that called itself Aran weight because the pattern said it needed Aran weight. I just got 5mm needles and I didn't even measure him. I went for the single malt sweater. I didn't even measure him. I just picked, okay, well, he normally wears an XL in his clothes, so I'll make an XL. And I just cast on and went for it. And that one, I got to the end of the raglan. I knit probably about 3 or 4 inches on the body. And I tried to fool myself for the majority of that time that it was going to fit him. And it just wasn't. There was no way. I think it might have fit a toddler. It was tiny. The yarn I'd picked was quite a thin Aran weight. I hadn't swatched for it. It was extremely gappy open fabric. And I hadn't even measured him. So yeah, gauge, swatch for gauge, particularly for garments. Go and find, I'll put below some links, like I say, to some videos that are useful for gauge and understanding what that means and how to do it and understand when to do it as well. I've mentioned on the podcast a couple of times that I don't gauge swatch, but I still do sometimes. I don't always not. But that's come from 5 years of knitting experience and multiple garments. And now I know that, fingering weight yarn on a 3.5mm needle will give me this gauge in stockinette. So I know roughly if I'm about right for the pattern. If it's a yarn I've not used before, if it's something like this, which is cabled, if it says that the gauge needs to be in cables, I'm going to swatch because I don't know, I don't know my gauge. If it is a needle size and yarn combo I'm unused to or anything like that, I will gauge swatch. So when I sit on my podcast and say, well, I didn't swatch for this, I just went for it, my advice is to somebody who is a beginner or who is less confident with the knitting would be to still gauge swatch, particularly for garments, because it's exhausting to finish something and realise it doesn't fit. So that's the first one. The second one is being aware, if you're making things for you, of the kind of colours that you will wear. So I had... This is such a me thing. I had knitted almost 2 full sweaters when I was very new to knitting, when it took me a very long time to knit sweaters, that I ended up giving both of them away. One of them got frogged. I didn't actually finish it. And one of them I gave them away. And it was completely because of colour. So I made I got fully sucked into a bargain on Facebook. I saw on Facebook Marketplace somebody was selling, and it was a shop that I think was closing down. She was selling some Wendy, I think it was Wendy. It was just Wendy's cheap acrylic. And I've got no problem with Wendy's cheap acrylic. We're going to come on to fibre choices and things like that. I really like, actually, Wendy's acrylic. But it was in this colour which I think was called Punchy Pink. It's not me at all. She was selling it because I think it was the end of a colourway line, and she was selling it off because she was trying to clear her stock. I bought 10 balls of this for like £8. It was super cheap. It might have even been less than that. It might have been like £5 plus postage. It was so cheap. And I bought it because it was cheap. And it arrived and instantly I went, I don't like that colour. What have I done? It wasn't even just pink. It was like a neon coral. Neon, not even a good coral, like a salmon pink. Like a bright orangey salmon pink. Not good. Not my colour at all. And rather than just writing it off as a bad job, I persisted. And I knit the entire body of a Whitmore sweater. I do have a picture of that, so I'll pop that on screen. And I worked all of the body. I did all of the yoke. I did all the stockinette in the body. I did all the ribbing. I put it on and instantly went, I don't like this. And you'd think that would have been the point at which you learn. But I didn't. And then I had a test later in the year for the Pine Warbler sweater for Andrea Gorn, which was a really beautiful pattern. I love that pattern. And I knit this in, again, 100% acrylic, which was fine. But I knit it in Stylecraft Special DK, I think, for the back in the colourway Fireworks or something like that, which was a really nice cream with like sort of speckles, tweedy speckles of rainbow colours. And I used this coral again for the colour work and for the collar and the cuffs. And I kept that for a while because I told myself, I finished it, the fit was lovely. The pattern, by the way, that pattern is absolutely lovely. I really want to remake that at some point. I keep saying that, I've never got round to it, but maybe next year, maybe I will actually get round to it, because the fit on that was wonderful. But I never wore it because of that bloody pink again. It was just the colour. I held on to that for, I think it was only this year I got rid of it. So I held on to that for 4 years because I was determined I was going to wear it. So just be aware of the colours that you actually will wear. And again, that's not super easy to work out, but just be honest with yourself. Will I actually wear this, or do I just like the colour? Because I think they're very different things. And I've definitely fallen foul of that. Even this year, as what I would consider a more experienced knitter, I knit a t-shirt earlier in the year in a light powdery baby blue that is just not my colour. And I'll be honest, I never wore it. It went straight in the bin. I love the t-shirt. I hated the yarn and the colour. So yeah, no, not for me. So that's the other one, it would be to be aware of the colours that you will use. Like I touched on at the beginning, make sure you've got enough yarn for your project. Make sure you've got enough yarn for your project. As a general rule of thumb, a lot of these, actually this doesn't, but a lot of these will give you a bit of an idea of how many balls you might need for a project. But go and find a free pattern, something like the Flax by Tin Can Knits, that'll give you some sizes, give you some yardages, and give you a bit of an idea, just to save that. Let's be honest, we've all got stuff like this, haven't we? We've got one single ball of different things in our stash that we say we're going to use, but we got it when we were beginners, and we go, oh, I can definitely make something out of one ball of chunky weight yarn. No, you can't. Or you can, but you're not going to make a garment if that's what you want to make. So that's the other thing I would say. And learn your own body dimensions is the other thing I would say. I have plenty of things that are too oversized or that were too short. That was a big thing for me earlier on, was too short. I would just knit to pattern, and I would be worried about adding length because I didn't really understand it. And then I ended up with things that were way too cropped, or that were, the sleeves were too short or whatever. Yeah, that was the other pitfall I made. That pine warbler was unfortunately another victim of that. I just knit exactly to the pattern. I think it had a 10-inch body. Now, as a more experienced knitter now, I know that I tend to do 17 inches on my body, and that's a really nice fit for me. So I was 7 inches shy of where I should have been, really. It's mad, isn't it, when you think about all this time that you've put into these projects. So they're the main pitfalls that I made as a beginner, and I think, yeah, they're ones that are worth keeping an eye out for. But I wanted to touch on some things that are quite often said as beginner tips that I don't think you need to worry about. So one of them is starting simple, or knitting something basic, or knitting face cloths, or crocheting granny squares. There's a video that did the rounds a while back, and I think it's still every so often it comes around again, and it's Elise Myers. It's a short video. I quite often see it on Facebook, and she's talking about if you are somebody who has maybe ADHD or something like that, do not start crocheting with granny squares, because you'll love it. You'll love the granny square, but then you'll realise to make that cardigan or that blanket or whatever it is you want to make, you need to make 300 of those and you won't want to do it by the end of that. And I think she's got a really good point there. Just because somebody says you should start with baby knits, or you should start with washcloths, or you should start with accessories, or you should start with, whatever, if that's not what you want to make and that's not what you want your hobby to be, you won't wear them, you won't use them. You'll lose interest in them. I was watching my friend Leah of the Ruby and Pearls podcast the other day. She did a knit and chat that came out, I think, yesterday, and she was talking about how a lot of her early days she made baby knits, despite the fact that she didn't really have any babies in her life to knit for, because she really liked the satisfaction of knitting something small, getting those interesting constructions in, and getting it completed quite quickly. That's absolutely fine. I am somebody who went for quite complex things quite early on, because I just what I wanted to do. So I've always been a bit of a subscriber to, if you know basic stitches, and actually even if you don't, you can learn how to do anything on YouTube. You can go and find a tutorial, and that's all I did for most things. Follow a pattern, and whenever I get stuck on a technique, go and find a tutorial on YouTube, because there will be one. There will absolutely be one. I have never come across anything on YouTube that anything in a pattern that I haven't been able to find a tutorial for on YouTube. And that is where this comes in. So this that I'm wearing today is the Monteria pullover by, it's Knit Picks. It's a Knit Picks pattern. It is this really lovely cabled yoke. I think it's a saddle shoulder. Yeah, it is a saddle shoulder. I'm trying to remember how I constructed it. Saddle shoulder construction. You start with these saddles, You then actually join them with the neckline and you start working this downwards. It's got a short row sleeve cap, it's got cables all down the top, it's broken rib. These cables are all across the back as well. And this was the second ever sweater I knit. I'm not even kidding. I knit I think the first ever sweater I knit was a test knit, which was the fractal sweater for EmilyKnitsDesigns. I don't have that anymore because it just doesn't, do you know what, it wasn't my best work. I kept it for a long time because it was my first sweater. I don't have any pictures of it either, unfortunately, because I didn't put it on Ravelry. I didn't understand how to do Ravelry test codes at the time. But my first ever sweater was a test knit, which went really well. So that's another one, is don't do test knits if you're a beginner. Rubbish. If you want to do a test knit, you can do a test knit. Just pick something that's at your sort of level. That was doable. And yeah, this was the second. So I cast this on in July 2021 when I had been knitting for less than a year. And actually, initially, I started knitting a little bit. I did my garter stitch scarf and I did this big blanket, but actually I spent most of my first year crocheting, really, really aggressively, actively crocheting, and didn't do much knitting at all other than basics. And then I did a sweater and then I did this. And this is really good, actually. So I don't wear this very often because it's actually not for me. This is a pattern that I made for my husband. And it's gorgeous. It fits. It's too big on him now. I mean, it's too big on me, but it did used to fit him really nicely. He did wear it quite a bit when I initially finished it. And if I'd have looked at this and looked at, oh, well, it's not really a beginner pattern, I shouldn't make that, it's a bit advanced, I don't know if I ever would have made it. But look, I did it and it's absolutely fine. There was nothing in it that I couldn't do. So I think make whatever you want. Don't be afraid or intimidated to just try and just see, because at the end of the day, the worst thing that could happen is you have to unravel a little bit. And even if you've got to unravel to the beginning of a project, yes, it's frustrating, but you can still reuse that yarn, you can still redo that pattern, you can still reuse those needles. You're not going to lose anything other than some time by doing it, and you'll learn so much along with that. I learned so much doing this. I'd never cabled before. This was my first cable pattern as well. And I learned so much by doing this. I think there is one single cross that goes the wrong way, but I can't see it. And I don't know if you can, but I certainly can't. And nobody else is going to be able to see it. The other thing, and I think this is a really big thing I wanted to highlight actually, I think sometimes in some pockets of our hobby, we can be a little bit snobby about certain yarns. And I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's personal preference. I think, what is the saying? Don't yuck someone else's yum. Oh, I've just looked at my bind off. My bind off on this is terrible. Okay, that's, you know, finishing details is maybe something to look at. What's the saying? Don't yuck someone else's yum. If you're completely entitled to your own preferences. If you really only want to use merino wool because that's all you can use, that's absolutely fine, but don't crap on someone else for using what they want to use either. And I think because of that, sometimes I certainly thought when I was a beginner, well, I can't use acrylic for garments because you're not supposed to use acrylic for garments, that's not what that's for. I can't use this for this because that's not what that's for. And I think that's absolutely rubbish. And I think also, again, this is another testament to this. So I knit this entirely out of Stylecraft Special DK, which is 100% budget-friendly acrylic in the shade dark grey. I can't remember what the shade was. This whole thing, other than time, obviously it cost me a lot of time, but I think it cost me less than £10 to make. It's a very inexpensive yarn. It has held up wonderfully well. It can go in the machine, which is great. And however many times have you seen things that say, well, you shouldn't use acrylic for cables. Cables isn't no good for cables. Acrylic, ta-da, absolutely fine. So use what you want, knit what you want. Don't be afraid to go and find tutorials on Instagram, on YouTube or Instagram. Actually, there are some good ones on Instagram and Reels and things like that. And above all, the main thing for me is, I think, don't let anybody tell you that you should or shouldn't do something a certain way. Don't let anybody tell you how you should or shouldn't enjoy your own hobby. There is a hell of a lot to be said for beginner confidence. This is a perfect example of it. One of my friends, when I met her, she crocheted. She started knitting not super long after I'd met her, and the first garment she made was an intarsia sweater. She wanted it, so she did it, and I tell you what, she did a bloody good job of it. It was incredible. It was something that I would have looked at as an experienced knitter and gone, I can't do that. I'm just doing my first intarsia project now as a 5-year experienced knitter, and it's hard. But there is a hell of a lot to be said for beginner confidence, and that's something I really think we can learn from sort of how we are as beginners, is to just dive in and just see what happens. Because I think at the end of the day, our hobby should be fun, and as long as you've got enough yarn and you've made sure you've got the right gauge, I think you're all good to go. Knit with whatever you want, make the things that you want to make, love them, enjoy them. And also the other thing I think it's worth saying as part of that is you don't have to keep up with the pace of what you see on Instagram and YouTube. Just because your favourite knitting podcaster is knitting 3 sweaters a week, or is knitting exclusively one designer's patterns, or has this particular aesthetic. If that's not your aesthetic, that's absolutely fine. You don't need to do that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, is just give it a go. The worst that could happen is you unravel and you start again, and I think that is one of the most wonderful things about our hobby. So that's my 2 cents. So there we go. There's some tips that I would say, some mistakes that I've made as a beginner, some completely stupid ones that I wish I'd learned, because it would have saved me a lot of time, and apparently I still haven't, because some of them I'm still making to this day, and some beginner tips that I think you can completely disregard. But I would love to hear down below, guys, the mishaps that you've had as beginners, the missteps that you've made, and the biggest things that you learn in your knitting journey as a beginner that have taken you to where you are now. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you found this interesting. I hope if you are a more beginner knitter, or you're somebody who wants to try that next level, because all of this applies to if you are somebody who constantly makes one type of thing and you'd really like, I know I've had comments from people before that have said, I'd love to try a sweater, but I'm intimidated. I'd love to try socks, but I'm intimidated. Give them a go. There's nothing bad's going to happen. Nothing bad's going to happen, I promise you. And we have this absolutely fantastic community here where I'm sure you will find people willing to help you. Gosh, I'm willing to help. If anybody's got any queries, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to be the best teacher, but I am willing to help as much as I possibly can. Drop me an Instagram message. Reach out to me on one of the contact methods below, and I'm more than happy to try and help. But yeah, let me know your mistakes that you've made, and I hope you found some inspiration, and if not, just had a laugh at my expense. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you're having a great afternoon, evening, weekend, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye, guys.